الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Last night we began a discussion on one of the last encounters that Musa alayhi salam has in his life. And this is his meeting with Khidr. We mentioned that this meeting most likely took place at the end of his life and probably during the 40 years of exile where the Israelites were roaming through the desert after they refused to enter the Holy Land and fight against the Amaleqa. Musa alayhi salam is very eager to meet this special servant of God who has been endowed with special knowledge. And this story really speaks to the humility of Musa alayhi salam. That this is a man who is regarded as one of the 5 messengers of great resolve. A man who is known as the interlocutor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kalimullah, and yet you see that in the last chapter of his life, he is willing to be a student. He's willing to take even some knowledge, not all knowledge from Khidr, even a little bit of knowledge from Khidr is enough for Musa alayhi salam to travel and go on this long journey and go through all of these difficulties and trials. This shows us that knowledge is sacred, especially the knowledge that brings us close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we mentioned last night, he meets Khidr and he asks for permission to accompany him. And Khidr alayhi salam, and again, there's a debate whether Khidr is a prophet or not, but it seems that based on the Quranic contextual clues, it seems that he's most likely a prophet. And the narrations say that Allah has granted him longevity, that he continues to be alive today, and he also plays a role in assisting the 12th Imam of Ahlul Bayt. Now, the only condition that Khidr sets for Musa is that you can join, you can accompany me, but do not ask me about anything until I voluntarily share it with you. Khidr says, essentially, I just want you to observe. Just observe and reflect. Do not be hasty in asking questions. And we mentioned last night that this condition was presumably set by Khidr to teach Musa a very important principle in the pursuit of knowledge. And that is, do not be hasty in putting forward questions, because you might understand if you just take a moment and reflect. Do not waste the time. Do not waste your time, and do not waste the time of your teacher. Some things you will understand simply by contemplation and reflection. So now the journey begins in ayah number 71 of Surah Al-Kahf. فَانْطَلَقَا. They set out. حَتَّى إِذَا رَكِبَا فِي السَّفِينَةِ. Now again, as I mentioned, the Quran only mentions 3 things that Khidr does. But it's very possible that Musa and Khidr spent weeks and maybe even months together. The Quran is just giving us a glimpse into this journey. Among the things that happens on this journey with Khidr is, so as we mentioned, they meet at the junction of the 2 seas. So they're on the shoreline. They decide to go to a shipyard and they get on a boat. Now, some of the historical accounts tell us that They get on this boat, and the fishermen who owned the boat, they offered to give Musa and Khidr a ride for free. Think of like a ferry that crosses one side of a body of water to another. These fishermen, they offered Musa and Khidr a free ride. Now, as soon as Musa and Khidr get on this boat, and again, Musa alayhi salam is expecting to receive knowledge and wisdom. He's observing Khidr very carefully, because after all, this is someone who Allah wants Musa to learn from. As they get on the boat and the boat, starts to go into the deeper waters, the Quran says, خَرَقَهَا. Khidr suddenly starts, I don't know what instruments he had with him, but he starts to make a hole in the boat. And you can imagine there's water gushing in, and Musa is wondering what's going on. So what does he say? From Musa's perspective, Khidr is putting a hole in the boat for only one reason. He says, قَالَ أَخَرَقْتَهَا لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا. Are you putting a hole in this boat to cause the passengers to drown? Now here, you notice something very interesting about Musa's personality, his character. Musa is also on the boat. He doesn't say to Khidr, are you trying to drown us? Are you trying to drown me? Whenever there is danger, Musa first thinks about others. He thinks about the safety of the passengers. He's not worried about himself. Yes, he's also on the boat, but his immediate reaction is to think about the safety of and the well-being of others. Look at what a noble man this is. His first instinct is like, how do I get off of this boat? Are there lifeboats? No. أَخَرَقْتَهَا لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا إِمْرًا. Are you putting a hole in the boat to drown the passengers? Surely this is a grievous thing that you're doing. Verse 72, قَالَ أَلَمْ أَقُلْ لَكَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعَيَ صَبْرًا. Khidr looks at him and says, didn't I tell you that you will not be able to remain patient with me? So Khidr scolds him that, listen, we had an agreement. You are just an observer. Do not comment, do not ask questions. Verse number 73, قَالَ لَا تُؤَاخِذْنِي بِمَا نَسِيتَ. Musa says to him, please do not hold me to account for what I forgot. Now here, this doesn't mean that Musa completely forgot. What it means is that, as I mentioned, forgetting sometimes happens where something happens that you see as a greater priority, and then you abandon something that you had agreed to. So it's not that he necessarily forgot, but rather what was happening was so egregious that it demanded him. Because again, Musa is operating based on Sharia. From his perspective, he's just doing nahi anil munkar. So now Musa is prioritizing. So it's like, for example, yes, it's important to pray and you shouldn't break your prayer. But if someone is drowning in front of you, you break your prayer. Because there's a priority now that you have to save someone who's drowning. So Musa alayhi salam promises Khidr that I'm not going to question you. But the last thing that Musa is thinking is that Khidr is going to damage someone else's property. I have a responsibility because Sharia tells me that I have to forbid evil, and I am seeing something that appears to be evil. قال لا تؤاخذني بما نسيت ولا ترهقني من أمري عسرا. So Musa says that, listen, don't blame me for what I forgot, for what I abandoned, because nasit could also mean abandoned. I abandoned my initial promise to you because there was a greater priority that required my attention, and that is to forbid the evil that I was seeing. And he says, and do not be hard on me. Musa says that, don't go, just be patient with me too. Don't be too tough on me. فَانْطَلَقَا. They continue their journey. And again, we don't know Some people, some of us might think this is all happening on the same day. Maybe days and weeks go by and then the second episode takes place. Because some narrations tell us that he saw many wondrous things on this journey with Khidr. Ayah 74, فَانْطَلَقَا حَتَّى لَقِيَا غُلَامًا فَقَتَلَ. Now, if Musa thought that damaging a boat was grievous and was munkar, he was in for a surprise. So they're walking together and they come across a group of kids that are playing, and Musa sees that Khidr grabs a young boy, takes him around the corner, and he slaughters him. Now, Musa alayhi salam, from his perspective, he just witnessed a homicide. He just witnessed a murder. So, قال أقتلت نفسا زكية بغير نفس. Again, Musa is always going back to Sharia. It's haram to damage property based on Sharia, based on the apparent laws. He's saying, are you killing an innocent soul without due right? Again, this is based on the Sharia. You're doing something that's going against the Sharia, that's going against what is obviously prohibited. لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا نُكْرًا. That you've committed a deplorable act. Ayah 75. قَالَ أَلَمْ أَقُلْ لَكَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. This is a very intense, crash course. That Khidr simply says, didn't I tell you that you would not be able to be patient with me? So here, verse 76, Musa alayhi salam, he says, قال إن سألتك عن شيء بعدها فلا تصاحبني. Musa says, you're right, listen. If I question you one more time, then you can leave me. You can dismiss me as your student. You can say that you can no longer accompany. قَدْ بَلَغْتَ مِن لَدُنِّي عُذْرًا. If I question you one more time, then I don't have any excuse with you anymore. You have full right to dismiss me as your companion. فَانْطَلَقَا. They continued on their journey. And I don't know, maybe Musa is probably afraid for his life now. This guy can kill a child without being fazed. Who knows if I'm even safe. Ayah number 70, the next ayah number 77, فَانْطَلَقَا حَتَّى إِذَا أَتَيَا أَهْلَ قَرْيَةٍ اسْتَطْعَمَهَا أَهْلَهَا. They continue traveling, and again, this journey must have been a very long journey. They then arrive in a village. They're probably traveling through the wilderness, through the deserts. It's a long journey, and they don't have food with them. They're just probably eating from whatever grows from the earth. They came to a village, and it was customary at that time that when you visit a village, when you're a guest, when you're a traveler, when you're a wayfarer, usually the people of that village, they show you some hospitality. You're a new face, you're visiting our city, our village. It's customary that someone would at least offer. And if no one offers, surely if you ask for food, they would give you. They might not have the generosity to offer you without being asked, but surely any civilized people, any people with a shred of decency and a shred of humanity, if travelers are asking for food, they would give some food. فَأَبَوْا أَن يُضَيِّفُوهُمَا. This particular village, the people of this village were so stingy that even when Musa and Khidr are asking for a meal, they refuse to give them any food. Very inhospitable people, stingy people. فَوَجَدَا فِيهَا جِدَارًا. So they're hungry, and now they're just in the middle of this very hostile community, and they come across a wall that's about to collapse. يريد فوجد فيها جدارا يريد أن ينقض فأقام. So Khidr begins some construction project. We're starving. These people were so rude to us. They didn't even have the decency to give us a loaf of bread. And suddenly, Khidr starts repairing this wall, sweating, working, and who knows, maybe he spent days and weeks just repairing this wall. Now, Musa alayhi salam, he says he couldn't hold himself. قال لو شئت لاتخذت عليه أجرا. So here Musa, he doesn't object. He doesn't say, why are you building this wall? This is a complete waste of time. They're rude. He tries to rephrase it in a more gentle way. He says that, you could at least ask for some wage, some payment. But of course, Khidr, he got the message. That was Musa's way of protesting for the third time. قال هذا فراق بيني وبينك. Khidr says that now you and I have to go our separate ways. We have to part ways. سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا. But before you leave, I'll explain to you the interpretation of my actions. What's interesting here is that Khidr dismisses him at this point. Now, what you notice about the story is that the story begins with Musa losing his lunch. The roasted fish jumps into the sea. And now what you see here at the end of the story is that Musa is also hungry. He was denied a meal. The beginning of the story is hunger, and the end of the story is hunger. And that's very important here, because the spiritual insight, the lesson here is the quest for deep spiritual knowledge was never meant to be comfortable. It requires sacrifice. It requires difficulty. Now, what you notice here is there were 3 incidents that took place. The first incident, when Khidr put the hole in the boat, who was Musa thinking about? قَالَ أَخَرَقْتَهَا لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا. Are you putting a hole in the boat to cause the passengers to drown? He was thinking about others. When the boy was killed, Musa objected. He was objecting for the sake of others, advocating for those who he believes are being wronged. The third incident, he was thinking about who? He was thinking about himself. Musa was thinking about himself. He was hungry. He was thinking about his stomach. And that's when he loses the tawfiq of continuing with Khidr. The moment you make the pursuit of knowledge, the moment you bring the self into the equation, when you're pursuing spiritual knowledge, Allah strips you of tawfiq. You lose out. Now, before they go their separate ways, Khidr starts to explain the interpretation and the wisdom behind his actions. Verse number 79. أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر. As for the boat, he says the boat belonged to some poor people who used to work in the sea. Basically, he's saying that this boat that I damaged belonged to some masakin. Masakin are people who are very impoverished. They're poor. Poor fishermen. Now, what's interesting here is that these fishermen, according to the Quran, they're poor. And this is very important for us to consider. Because sometimes you and I, we have the impression that Poor people are only the ones who are begging in the streets, who are homeless, who don't own anything. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah, He tells us that these poor people owned a boat. And a boat is not something that's necessarily cheap. So it's possible for people to own things that are valuable and still be struggling. You know, sometimes you think, oh, but they have a house, they have a car. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is trying to teach us that don't be so naive to think that a poor person has to have torn clothes and be homeless and sleeping in the streets. Sometimes people who have jobs, who own things, are struggling. So don't limit the definition of poverty and poor people to those who are completely down and out. There are some people who have jobs, who own things, who still need help, who are struggling. أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر فأردت أن أعيبها. It belonged to these poor fishermen, and I wanted to cause a defect in their boat. I wanted to damage it. وكان وراءهم ملك يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا. There was a king, a tyrannical king. It seems that there was some type of war that was going on, and he needed military ships, and he would confiscate the ships that he finds in the shipyard, in the marina. So I damaged it to save it. Because if they see a hole in the boat, it's not going to be confiscated, but the hole is actually easily repairable. It's an inconvenience. It probably ruined their day, but at least they have their boat. I saved it for them. Now, if you remember, these same fishermen, they were very generous. See, there are some poor people who will hold on to everything because in their minds, my poverty justifies my stinginess. I should receive because I'm poor. These fishermen, even though they were poor, they gave a free ride to Musa and Khidr, meaning they committed an act of charity. And what was the instrument of their charity? Their boat. So here, one of the important lessons is that if you want Allah to preserve something for you, make that thing an instrument of charity. The best insurance for your stuff is to share it and use it for charitable purposes. You know what's better than insurance on your car with, State Farm? Is from time to time to use your car to give free rides to people who are in need. Because if you turn what you have into instruments of charity, Allah will protect the instruments of charity. So because of their charity, Allah protected their boat from being completely confiscated. And these fishermen, they will never know that one day when they came in and they were probably frustrated and they lost an opportunity to fish that day, to them, this is so annoying. We have a hole in the boat. And many of them probably thought, oh God, why me? But little do they know that was actually a reward. That was God's mercy that came to them in the form of something that's inconvenient. It's kind of like us, sometimes you're on the highway, you're stuck in traffic, you missed your flight. It's not the end of the world, but man, what an inconvenience. Got to rebook and I lost some money. But who knows? Maybe if you got on that flight, you would have faced some sort of calamity that would have altered your life forever. So that inconvenience, missing your flight, getting stuck in traffic, that flat tire, whatever it is, that was Allah's mercy upon you that came in the form of an inconvenience, but you didn't realize it. And while you're angry with Allah and you're so frustrated with your life, Allah actually showed you so much love and mercy, but you don't realize it. Isn't that the story of us human beings? So many things inconvenience us and irritate us and aggravate us, but Allah is actually protecting us from greater calamities. There's actually a blessing, a hidden blessing. Now, verse number 80. وَأَمَّا الْغُلَامُ فَكَانَ أَبَوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْنِ. As for that young boy had two pious parents. فَخَشِينَا أَن يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. And we feared that he would overburden them by transgression and disbelief. Some scholars say that if this child remained, he would grow up and he would take his parents away from the path of God. They would transgress. Sometimes parents influence kids, but sometimes kids influence parents. So he says that I ended this child's life. He says, فَأَرَدْنَا أَن يُبْدِلَهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا خَيْرًا مِنْهُ زَكَاةً وَأَقْرَبُ رُحْمًا. That we wanted to replace this child with a child that is better, more pure, and nearer to mercy. Now, the narrations say that after this child died, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave these parents a daughter. And this daughter, later on in her progeny, many prophets emerged from her progeny. So she became a mother of prophets. Now you may wonder here, why did he have to die? Why didn't Allah just guide him? Why did he have to be replaced? Allah replaced this bad son for a good daughter. Why didn't Allah just make the son good? Why didn't he just guide him? Allah essentially replaces this child with another child. Why did he replace? Why didn't he just change that boy? The reason is death, and this is the lesson that Khidr is teaching. Death is something natural. We're all going to die. There's nothing unnatural about death. Death is very natural. And Khidr was basically, in a way, if you and I do what Khidr does, of course we would be disobeying God. But Khidr has a very specific task. And he's basically acting as the angel of death. That child died. Death is something that's natural. But you know what's unnatural? Is to force the heart to accept what it doesn't want to accept. Ultimately, Allah is not going to interfere with the free will of people. If it was possible to guide, Allah will guide. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to impose himself on his servants. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's not going to do something that is unnatural, because Allah has, the entire philosophy of creation is to come to God willingly. And therefore this child dies before it reaches the age of bulugh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in his wisdom, he decided to show mercy to this child. Now to you and I, this is horrific. But again, sometimes the mercy of God manifests itself as an inconvenience. Other times, the mercy of Allah manifests as something that seems very abhorrent. Here, this child is killed. Sometimes it's an earthquake. You see all these innocent people dying, and you're wondering, where's the mercy of God? So here, what Khidr is emphasizing is the rahmah of Allah manifests in different ways. To you, it's ugly. To you, it's nothing but a calamity. It's horrific. because you're only looking at one dimension of human existence. You know, imagine you have a portal, right? One side is dunya and the other side is the akhirah. You're just looking at the dunyawi side. If you were standing on the side of the akhirah and you were to see how these innocent people, how the oppressed are received, you'd be like, no, okay, that makes sense. Because we have narrations that after death, after people are dipped into their temporary paradise or the permanent paradise, they're asked, have you ever experienced any suffering? And the creature, the human being, whoever it is, will say, no. I've never experienced any pain and suffering. You see, when you're only looking at dunya, it's just all cruelty and misery. The problem what Khidr is trying to teach Musa is our visceral reactions to what we perceive to be cruelty in the world is simply because we are reacting to the pixel and not the picture. That's what the story is about. You and I see the pixel, and when you look at a pixel is very, you can't make it out. It's very cloudy. It's very confusing. It's just a blur. And therefore, you cannot appreciate the beauty of the pixel. A pixel just looks like chaos. And that's what life feels like sometimes. Especially when natural disasters happen. It doesn't seem like there's any method to the madness. It seems like chaos and suffering and agony. And you're thinking to yourself, where is God? What is going on? I thought he's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. So here, Khidr is basically telling Musa that I don't blame you because Allah only gave you the ability to see the pixel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who sees the picture. Now, when do we see the picture? Some people are given knowledge and they're able to see the picture. They have ilmul ghaib. But you and I, Allah's not going to reveal the picture to us. Just like with the angels. Why are you going to place a vicegerent on earth who's going to spill blood and cause corruption? Even the angels, when they saw insan, they just saw a chaotic pixel. Just a mess of a creature. And what does Allah say? I know what you don't know. I see the picture, you see the pixel. Now, we go to the next verse. وَأَمَّا الْجِدَارُ فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ يَتِيمَيْنِ. As for the wall, that structure that was on the verge of collapse, it belonged to two orphans. في المدينة. فكان لغلامين يتيمين في المدينة. وكان تحته كنز لهما. And under this wall that was about to collapse was a treasure. وكان أبوهما صالحا. And their father was a righteous man. فأراد ربك أن يبلغ أشدهما. Your Lord wanted them to attain maturity. وَيَسْتَخْرِجَ كَنْزَهُمَا. And Allah wanted them to reach the age of maturity and discover the wealth that was left for them. And this was رَحْمَةً مِّن رَبِّكَ. And this was a mercy of God. وَمَا فَعَلْتُ عَنْ أَمْرِي. And this was not something that I did of my own accord. And this is why scholars like Allama Tabatabai, he says that this is an indication that he was a prophet. Because he's following God's revelation to him. He's a recipient of this inspiration and revelation. ذَلِكَ تَأْوِيلُ مَا لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. What's beautiful here is that Allah's rahmah sometimes appears in the form of an inconvenience, like the damaged boat. Sometimes the mercy of God looks abhorrent because we only see the pixel and we don't see the picture. And sometimes the mercy of God is just hidden. We just don't understand. Nothing abhorrent is happening, but you just don't get it. Like, what's the point of this? It's hidden. Khidr explains that I did this, Allah commanded me to do this, to erect this wall. Because these orphans, they had a father who was righteous. The narrations tell us that the Quran is not speaking about their immediate father. He's speaking about their great-great-grandfather. That back, if you go up their ancestral line, they had a great-great-grandfather who was very pious and very righteous. So to honor him, I'm taking care of the orphans that came later on in his progeny. This is very powerful, brothers and sisters. I want you to take a moment and just understand how amazing this ayah is. It's very possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided you. Of course, ultimately, Allah is not going to just guide someone who just doesn't want to be guided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have given you opportunities, not because you deserve it, but maybe you had a great-grandfather or a great-grandmother who on one night in the month of Ramadan maybe made a dua, and Allah says, I'm going to honor you through your children. You might be, as you're sitting here in this majlis, and you're praying and fasting, maybe everything that Allah has given you is because of your ancestors. That's why, my dear brothers and sisters, in these nights, on the nights of Qadr, when you pray, when you make dua, when you do a good deed, when you hold the door, when you feed a poor person, it's not just impacting your life. Look at how Allah has given you the ability to amplify goodness. Maybe what you're doing today, 7 generations from now, Allah will raise someone great just to honor that one good deed that you did in your life. And that good deed will become a part of your legacy. Khidr says, I'm doing this because they had a father who was pious. They had a father who was pious. Now it's time for Musa and Khidr to go their separate ways. There's a narration from Imam al-Sadiq salawatullahi alayhi. He says, إن موسى حين أراد أن يفارق الخضر قال له أوصني. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, when Musa was about to leave the presence of Khidr, first time they met, and it was the last time that they met, Musa said to Khidr, before I leave, can you give me some parting advice? You're obviously a man of God. You're a man who works in mysterious ways. I just want some final thoughts from you, some parting advice. Among the things that Khidr tells Musa is, لا تعيرن أحد بذنب. Khidr says to Musa, O Musa, never denigrate a human being because of a sin that they committed. Don't look down on someone because they committed a sin. Don't think that you're better than people, because people can change. It's not your job to place people in Jannah or send them to hell. Don't denigrate people when they commit sins. Have hope that they might come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, وَإِنَّ أَحَبَّ الْأُمُورِ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثَلَاثٍ. Khidr says to Musa, the most beloved things to Allah are 3. He says, number 1, moderation in abundance. Always be moderate, O Musa. If Allah gives you a lot, if He gives you a lot of wealth, don't lose yourself. Be moderate, be measured, be balanced in everything that you do. Don't go to extremes. Don't think, oh, because Allah has given me wealth, I have to just completely go all out. Be moderate. And then he says, number two, وَالْعَفْوُ فِي الْمَقْدِرَةِ. And number two, the second most beloved thing to Allah, O Musa, is pardon people when you have the power to punish them. Let your pardon and your forgiveness when you have power be an expression of your gratitude to Allah for giving you authority. When you have power, don't think that I always have to come down with an iron fist. Because pardoning people can be more impactful than punishing people. Pardon even when you have the ability to punish. And then he says in number three, وَالرِّفْقُ بِعِبَادِ اللَّهِ. He says, be gentle with the servants of Allah. Be gentle with people. Because people are fragile. People are delicate. Maybe one look can be the reason why someone doesn't come to the masjid anymore. One hurtful word. You think that, oh, it's nothing. I was just a joke. We treat these hurtful words like they're just stones that we cast into the sea. Yes, that's just a stone that you threw into the heart of that person. But do you know how deep that stone can go? Be gentle with the servants of God. And then he says, وَمَا رَفَقَ أَحَدٌ بِأَحَدٍ فِي الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا رَفَقَ اللَّهُ بِهِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. And Khidr says, and whoever is gentle with people in this life, Allah will be gentle with him when he takes him to account on the day of judgment. Musa leaves and he returns to his community. And as we mentioned, the Israelites were still wandering in exile for 40 years. The narrations say that an entire generation of Israelites, they died during that exile. And during this period, Harun also passed away. And Musa alayhi salam, he was so grief-struck by the death of Harun that the narrations say that he ripped his shirt in grief when he lost Harun. He performed the ghusl and the funeral rites of Harun. And then as the years passed, 3 years later, Musa alayhi salam is now on his deathbed, in exile with his community. And all of the Israelites, they gathered around him as he was in his final moments. And he requested some things before he died. He said to his people, gather the wooden tablets that were revealed to me on Mount Sinai that one day. And he says, bring my armor. Because again, Musa was prepared to fight and enter the Holy Land. Bring my armor, bring my staff. He also wanted some of his garments. Bring a little bit of the men that we used to eat when we crossed the Red Sea. Bring the sandals that I wore. And he says, and also give me the turban of my brother Harun. Harun used to wear a turban. He says, bring it for me. And gather some of these other relics that were connected to Musa and his life. And the narrations say that he took all of these sacred relics and he put it in a wooden box. But not any wooden box. The same wooden box that Jibreel gave to his mother when she put him in the Nile. The same box. We go back to the beginning of the story. He puts all of this in that wooden box, and this box becomes known as the Ark of the Covenant. The narrations say that he puts all of this and he gives it to Joshua. He gives it to his successor, Yusha ibn Nun. And subhanAllah, in our tradition, we believe that Imam al-Mahdi has all of these relics with him. That these relics, the turban of the Prophet, the sword of the Prophet, all of these things have been preserved. These relics have not been lost. They exist today with that man who represents all those prophets, who will fulfill the divine promise, who will fulfill what all of these prophets were trying to achieve, and that is to bring the word of God to humanity, to rule according to divine values. And after entrusting this sacred legacy, after surrendering the Ark of the Covenant to Yusha bin Nun, Musa alayhi salam, he breathes his last. His soul departs his body on the eve of the 21st of Ramadan, the exact day and night that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib departed this world. And the moment that Musa died, the narrations tell us that a call was made in the heavens. Mata Musa kalimullah. Musa, the one to whom Allah spoke, has died. فَأَيُّ نَفْسٍ لَا تَمُوتُ. But what soul doesn't die? And this marks the end of our series, my dear brothers and sisters. And I'll just end with this final comment. And that is that when you read and you study the lives of these incredible personalities, they seem larger than life. You think to yourself that this man actually lived, and someone like Musa died, this man of power, this man of greatness, this man who was so beloved to Allah, a great leader, a recipient of divine revelation. But that's what's going to happen to all of us. And I'll end with this final hadith where it is said that when Nuh alayhi salam, on the last day of his life, and the narrations say that he lived longer than any other human being. He lived for over 2,000 years according to our traditions. He was standing one day, it was a hot day. The angel of death appeared to him. And the prophets were able to perceive the angel of death. They could see the angel of death. And Malakul Maut would often visit these great prophets. But on this day, it was not just a visit. It was the time of departure. And Nuh alayhi salam, he asks, are you here for some matter, or are you here for what you typically are here for? So the angel of death says that, Nuh, your time is finished. I've come to take your soul. And Nuh alayhi salam, he asks, do I have a little bit of time left? And Malakut Maut says, you have a few moments left. And Nuh alayhi salam, he looks up at the sun. He was standing under the sun. He took a few steps and he stood under the shade of a tree. And Malakul Maut said to him, O Nuh, you lived longer than any person. If there's anyone that understands the nature of this life, it's you, because you're the most experienced. Tell me, what did you think about life? What was your impression? He says to the angel of death that, Ya Malak al-Maut, this life was as brief to me as the few steps that I took from standing under the sun to standing in the shade. It's very brief. It's very brief. So let's make it only feels like a few moments. So let's make it a few moments of obedience to Allah and not a few moments of transgression. Because only Allah just wants us to do good for a few moments so that He can reward us with eternal bliss. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and to bless us and to illuminate our hearts with the teachings of Muhammad